Welcome to what is a somewhat delayed return for the Agents Angle with our first episode of 2025, but also a largely revised one following what is now becoming an annual New Year upheaval in the football agent world. With me, Jonathan Booker.
Me, Peter Paleologos. In this episode, we look at what was indeed a very eventful December 2024 and now further changes in 2025, whether it be the interim RSTP changes following the Diarra ruling or a largely unexpected revised version of the FFAR.
Yes, it seems FIFA have been very busy recently moving the proverbial deck chairs, and there may be signs all that Miami Sun may have gone to some of their heads.
All that to come on this episode of The Agents Angle.
So as many agents are understandably focused on the January transfer window in many leagues around the world, they have had yet more added to their in trays in terms of regulation updates and reports released over the last couple of months. But prospective new agents have also had a curveball thrown in their direction in the new year. And on the last episode of the Agents Angle, I think we made some light-hearted comments about it hopefully being a bit quieter on agent regulation matters over the Christmas and New Year's period compared to last year. But that episode was recorded prior to a lot of what has transpired since the recording.
Welcome back, Jonathan. Yes, it is a new year. I was hoping to focus on football deals, agent deals this January as part of the Agents Angle, as it's good to be back after a longish break and a chance to reset for the new year. But as you mentioned, even though with the transfer window open in many countries, surprisingly, agent matters, especially in the agent regulatory space, keep on developing. So we've just had to come back and face the regulatory matters again.
Yeah, it's not a very nice New Year's or Christmas present, that's for sure. And before we get on to the circular released by FIFA in what is just the last 48 hours or so, at the time of recording that is, regarding the agents exam, I want to approach these various releases and updates in a chronological order, which I think is a more sensible way to go. But if listeners do want to jump ahead and listen to our view on circular what is 1919 from FIFA announcing the first changes to the agent exam for 2025, of course you can, and then you can come back to these other updates. But the first such update we wanted to highlight that seemed to have landed in many an agent's inbox via email was an update from the English FA to many licensed agents registered with them to operate in England. And these agent bulletins from the FA are nothing new. The FA have done these updates usually 1 month prior to the transfer window's opening for a few years now. And over time, they've got better, detailing more than just key dates related to the transfer window, as was the case originally with earlier editions. And they now detail other changes and notifications that agents should be aware of, that I think are really useful to the agents and others for that matter. Now, a few things from this latest FA agent bulletin were, firstly, the reinforcement for the requirement of agents to use the new FA digital agent IDs, which we spoke about on the last episode of the Agents Angle, episode 51. And these are the FA digital IDs, not the FIFA digital ID. And in essence, if you have an FA digital ID, you should have a FIFA one anyway. There was also a repeated clarification of the additional requirements to represent minors from the FA. And this is something that the English FA have been particularly focused on for many years. And we've seen many agents sanctioned for not having that additional authorization. But in a contrast to the digital IDs, the FA authorization to represent minors is separate to the FIFA one. If you have one of them, it doesn't mean you necessarily have the other automatically. And then in addition to this, there was a variety of links and references to some useful resources, including the FIFA annual report on agents, changes to the regulations, changes to FIFA CPD, and of course the changes to the RSTP in light of the Diarra ruling. But a date that I probably should have been more readily aware of, and I will admit I wasn't until this bulletin, was the change to the ITC response timelines, which came into play on the 1st of January 2025. And ITCs, or international transfer certificates, can prove to be very much make or break for agents and their clients when it comes to international transfers. So, firstly, if I can ask you, Peter, was this ITC change part of the wider RSTP changes by FIFA? And also, do you want to comment on what you noted from the English FA Bulletin? As well as then, you can take us through what other big changes there were in December with regards to the revision of the RSTP by FIFA and some of the main aspects of that that you think will impact on agents the most.
Jonathan, I will start with the ITC. As you said, it's very important as agents. We do want to see the ITC, which is the International Transfer Certificate, come through quickly once we've completed a transfer or negotiated a player a deal, whether they're free or they've been bought by an engaging club. The ITC change has come through the interim framework that FIFA brought in response to the Diarra decision. I'll go through the other key points in that framework a bit later. But with the ITC, as you mentioned, the response timeline will be reduced from 7 days to 3 days starting the 1st of January. So the current transfer window we're in. So basically, the process for issuing ITCs has been streamlined, and this prevents the blocking of transfers due to contractual disputes between player and the club or the clubs. So any national association has to issue an ITC within 3 days, I mentioned, or 72 hours, and this issuance cannot be refused. This has come out of the Diarra decision because freedom of contract, the ability for people to be employed, it sort of flows on from that. So when we talk about 72 hours, the TMS counts each day as 24-hour increments. So the minute of the day that the midnight, I should say, on the day after the ITC is requested is when the clock starts, so those 72 hours. We know as agents, often players sign a deal and we're waiting for an ITC or a visa or a work permit, and these all have impacts, and we need to manage this issue. So this is a very good decision, I would say, or directive by FIFA here. I want to briefly mention the English FA Bulletin. I'm actually quite impressed with it because it contains a lot of important information. And they've got some key points for agents. It sets out very nicely. Besides having when's the men's transfer window, obviously opens on the 1st of January and closes on the 3rd of February. The women's transfer window, the 1st of January, closes on the 30th of January. It provides guidance to clubs and also agents because we're part of the negotiation, part of the transfers, part of registering players, that you need to have your paperwork, your registration paperwork submitted by these deadlines. Now, the approval could happen later by the FA to register a player after the deadline, but it's the paperwork that must be in by these deadlines. The other couple of matters, you mentioned quite a few, Jonathan, but this FA, I would say, memo talks about the 3-2 rule as well. So players can only play official matches for 2 clubs. They can be registered for 3 in one season, but they could play for a third club if there's an exception of overlapping seasons. It also mentions that the new version of the RSTP that's come in and other things like loans. The current international loan limit is 6 loans at any one time. But in terms of the English, there's some exemption, especially if it comes from a Welsh club to an English club. And it also reminds all agents about updated governing body endorsement criteria, the GBE, for the next season. We're getting a lot of players from Australia A-League coming into especially lower divisions in England, and the GBE criteria is very of importance. Now, I'll go into the RSTP itself. There have been some changes and which ones affect agents in the transfer market. And these changes are, I would say, important because agents need to be across them, especially if you're doing deals coming this January. It's an interim framework the FIFA's brought in because of the Diarra decision. This new interim framework is dealing with the compensation issue. So if there's a breach of contract by a player, will be now based on positive interest principle, which basically restores injured parties, say the club that the player was registered, back to the position where their breach, if it not happened, they would be in. So it doesn't allow for extreme compensation, but it allows for positive interest, which is compensation that is reasonable. Now, another change is when a player transfers and the club that has lost a player is not happy with them, they say that the new club interfered with the agent. There is a new rule about joint and several liability, which reverses the burden of proof. Basically, if the allegation is a player unjustifiably breached the contract, the club that he, she, or they were registered with has to prove that the new club induced the breach of contract. So the onus is shifted there, and that is very, very important. I would also talk about just cause. This is where it all came out for Diarra, and agents need to know this. So when a player unilaterally terminates a contract and trying to base themselves on just cause, there's a new general definition which agents should be aware of. And I'll just read it out. Just cause shall exist in any circumstance in which a party can no longer reasonably and in good faith be expected to continue a contractual relationship. That's a wide definition. Player's been bullied, player hasn't been paid, a player has been isolated. These are important things where maybe they have a more solid footing to terminate a contract. The final things I will say about the RSTP changes is this new framework. It's the duties for the parties to collaborate in establishing the facts. So all the parties, whether it's the player, the two clubs, when there's a complaint, they need to deal with the evidence directly and put it forward. So it makes it a little bit harder for clubs who allege inducement. They need to have strong evidence. Also, new clubs who bought the player or transferred the player, have more protection against automatic joint liability. And really, for agents, it's about if you're involved in representing one club or the other, you need to make sure you've also got your paperwork in order because that's crucial in transfer disputes. They're the major changes, I would say, which affect agents. Obviously, when we discuss further club agents in this and other episodes, agents play a big role in this sort of transfers, which raises disputes with the RSTP, especially since Diarra came on board, Jonathan.
And of course, they're only interim changes, so that minefield might well move very soon down the line. And these were in light of what FIFA termed as an invitation to open dialogue. But of course, we've seen, and many have experienced, not least with FFAR, that FIFA's interpretation of what such things as open dialogue and consultation actually mean can be quite, shall we say, different to the interpretation of others. And the interesting thing with these interim changes to the RSTP is that it's been reported these haven't been openly welcomed. And it isn't the agents this time, but FIFPro.
Yes, there's an article that's come out, or a few articles about FIFPro not being happy with this interim framework. I'm aware there was engagement. I actually put a submission in on what changes should be made in terms of Article 17 because of the Diarra ruling, just some suggestions. And there was engagement, maybe not with independent parties like ourselves who made submission, but definitely, I would say, with FIFPro, with ECHA, the European Club Association, and also football lawyers, a lot of experts who deal with a lot of the football law about what changes to make until they finally get some, I suppose, certainty around the Diarra case ruling. So there's an interim framework. This article mentions that they disagree with the interim changes, some of the interim changes I mentioned earlier, and they say that FIFPro informed FIFA the condition on which they would negotiate the amendments to regulation to reflect the ruling. So what they're saying is they haven't reached consensus with FIFA. They do not agree with the temporary measures that is FIFPro, that it's been announced by FIFA, because to be introduced, they wanted a proper collective bargaining process. Now, FIFA have counteracted that and said there's been a clear understanding that the first step would be an interim framework, and that has no impact on the ongoing consultation and long-term final rules. This is just a framework to provide stability and certainty for this transfer window. So FIFA and FIFPro are a bit at loggerheads here. FIFPro have said they will continue the global dialogue. There's no doubt about that, and want to have a final framework, a permanent framework, which aligns with European Court of Justice, the Diarra ruling views by July 2025. My view here, Jonathan, is FIFPro mentioned collective bargaining. I know a lot about collective bargaining. This happens here in the A-League in Australia and some other leagues, even Major League Soccer. Collective bargaining agreement takes a long time to negotiate. Therefore, we needed some certainty for this window, and I think an interim framework was a good idea, and I'm actually in favour of FIFA's approach because it doesn't close the door. They're going to come up with a final framework maybe towards June, July, as they mentioned, but we needed something to work with this window. And I understand FIFPro's concerns, but FIFPro also going to understand that collective bargaining agreements are a long game. They take a long time to get there, so that couldn't have been done before the January window.
It's certainly one to keep an eye on, and we're hopeful we can get some direct comment from FIFPro on this and other matters relating to agents. But am I surprised that FIFA charged ahead with this and not established a general consensus with a key party involved? Sadly, no, not really, as for me, leopards rarely change their spots. But the topic of effective consultation or even communication from FIFA on agent related matters is something that's received a lot of criticism for some time now and continues to receive criticism for that matter. And the reason why I raised this at this point in the show is because it relates to another document released by FIFA in December, which again was seemingly not communicated to many agents by FIFA, and that is crucially a new draft of the FFAR. Now, firstly, thank you to Gianluca Medina from Legis Lab who brought this new version of FFAR to my attention, as I would probably have missed it straight away, as I didn't receive notification from FIFA either via the agents portal or via email. In fact, I don't know if anyone else did in the agent community. Well, at least not from the people I asked anyway. That was until yesterday, at the time of recording, the 14th of January, when FIFA sent out an email on this topic. So, some 5 weeks after the amendments were approved, 2 weeks after they were seemingly covertly released without letting anybody know directly, and 2 weeks after the opening of many transfer windows. And FIFA wonder why people in the agents world are frustrated, annoyed, and have no faith in FIFA, and frankly just don't trust them a lot of the time. And on this, I would ask the question whether the FIFA Agent Working Group, the AWG or FAWG, whatever you want to call it, knew about these amendments, as that AWG reportedly met on the 17th of December, 7 days after the approval of this new draft. And if they were aware, why didn't members of the AWG relay that information to others? And if they weren't made aware by FIFA at the AWG meeting on the 17th of December or before that meeting, why not? I thought the purpose of the AWG was to consult with agents on related matters. But this release of a new version of the FFAR did at the time lead to a lot of speculation and uncertainty amongst agents and so-called experts on the topic of FFAR and what this latest draft actually meant.
Yes, this new FFAR version, I thought it would be more substantive, but you have to dig deep to see what's changed, Jonathan. But as you mentioned, the FIFA Council approved amendments to the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, FFAR. It seems the key update affects more the FIFA agent exam, from what I can see. But the way it came across, there has to be some other substantive changes to the version of the FFAR. But what's been provided, it's not clear to me. So I'm a little bit concerned of this revised version of the FFAR because it doesn't really reveal, other than the exam change, much of what's going on, Jonathan.
For me, there isn't much in this revised version of the FFAR at first glance. And maybe that's actually a saving grace for FIFA in the way it was somewhat covertly released. Because had there been more substantial changes to the FFAR in this version, this was just a couple of weeks before some of the big transfer windows were due to open, and it could have led to all sorts of problems and confusion for agents, clubs, players, and even national associations. But the main things that jumped out to me, as you've already spoken about from this second version of the FFAR, were more matters relating to what it didn't say or even had been deleted from the original draft. Firstly, the changes to Article 6 regarding the exam procedure. We were at the time of this release all left guessing as to what that actually meant, but now things are slightly clearer on that at the time of recording following the release of Circular 1919 by FIFA, albeit several things are still pretty unclear. And we've had to rewrite our notes for this show due to this circular dropping just some 48 hours ago.
I mean, the philosophy behind this change is, as you mentioned, an online exam should be pursued to allow more candidates to take the exam, I suppose, without incurring travel costs and related expenses. I know a lot of the African agents and the African football agents especially were big on getting fees down for the exam because each country was charging a different fee. Obviously, if it's centralized with FIFA running the exam, then the fee would be lower because there'll be a fee that's sort of compatible with what people can pay instead of each federation determining under its discretion. And you mentioned Article 6 of the FFAR. It was found that an online exam was not compatible, so they needed to amend it to have a more flexible procedure. It also mentions the change for the exam, which is moved to the 4th of March, the 17th of April 2025, and the date, the 18th of June 2025. So there's only one exam this year that's been reiterated in this circular or memo. I'm actually concerned about this change, this transparency. How do you deal with a candidate? How do you know a candidate? These are early questions, of course, who's taking the exam doesn't have a football lawyer next to them if they're going to do it from their house. Obviously, FIFA will deal with this, but let's watch this space. What we don't know is what are the terms and conditions of the FIFA football agent exam around what's going to happen. And FIFA will advise that in due course on their website. What are the exam rules? You notice the FAWG has been copied into this circular, and maybe they were part of the consultation to make a change. I agree. If there was going to be a change, especially the members from the agent association should be reporting to their members or sending some update or at least forthcoming warning to them. We do not receive that. And that is a little bit concerning because we need to know these things. It is a substantial change. And what did FAWG know about it? Was it their initiative to make this? Maybe, but we don't know.
Now, I wrote on my original show notes that any circular that details such changes regarding the exam has to come out ideally before the 13th of January. And that was the original window for applying for the 2025 exam, as you don't expect people to enrol for an exam and then change procedures and rules. So some sense has prevailed, if not consideration there, by FIFA for candidate agents to some extent at least. But this, as I said, led to a lot of speculation about what FIFA were planning following the changes to the FFAR and before this circular. And it's safe to say there were some links on this because some people were incredibly accurate as to what it meant. Whether these were from within FIFA or from the national associations isn't clear. But in the planning for this episode, Peter, and you saw the notes that I wrote previously, there was a worst case scenario and a better case scenario predicted by me as to what FIFA may actually do for the exam. Now, the worst case scenario, and this was my prediction, no crystal ball, was that FIFA switched to an online exam for everyone that candidates can effectively sit at home. FIFA take an exam fee or charge nothing. And in effect, this results, for me, in removing any value and credibility from licensing football agents whatsoever. You may as well give the license away with tokens from a box of breakfast cereal at this rate. The better case scenario was that FIFA actually listened to some of the advice they'd been given over a period of time when they were coming up with FFAR. And this was to follow the route of some other sports governing bodies in that they have regional exam venues, controlled environments that FIFA officials invigilate at. The exam cost is reasonable and taken by FIFA, but deducted against a successful candidate's annual license fee. Plus, they changed the exam format to be fairer to all candidates and more appropriate to the industry. Needless to say that with Circular 1919, I think I'm on course for my worst case scenario to be proved largely, if not wholly correct, sadly. Although we still need more detail from FIFA, as so much is still unclear.
You were ahead of your time, Jonathan. You made an insightful call, or I should say observations. Not saying you had a crystal ball, but you knew where this was heading, especially in terms of the exam and the licensing. For many, the shift or the change in direction, the way the exam's going to be held is quite promising, but it still raises important questions. As I mentioned earlier, transparency, online format, is that guaranteed fairness? Are we going to see more changes with the languages? Because you can easily now, if you're controlling the exam with AI, change the questions. And we know that with Brazil not having the exam in Portuguese was an issue. So you know that that may change the integrity of the exam process. Everything's shifting. And maybe some previous candidates will feel hard done by here, having spent money and having studied in a certain way instead of in your home comforts. Will it level the playing field? As I mentioned, the language changes. Are there going to be language changes? One thing's for sure, the exam will be once a year. So obviously you get one chance for those who sit. But there's also another thing. We're getting all these changes, and yet we don't have the European Court of Justice decision on the FFAR. That's still pending. I'm not saying that's going to affect the exam and the way licensing is going to take place, but we seem to be chopping and changing. We need certainty and a final destination. And I know these are interim measures or measures for now, but the end game is we need the final decision from the European Court of Justice to finalise a robust framework and not chopping and changing for FFAR, which includes licensing and everything else, Jonathan.
Yeah, and it's also putting a delay for those exam candidates. We always knew it would be, well, we were always told it would be one exam from 2025 onwards for each year. But the other thing I said that I could envisage FIFA changing in relation to the exam is the possibility that they may well outsource the exam to an external provider, as there's already signs of this now with the CPD element of the agent platform, which we have mentioned numerous times before. Thereby, FIFA retain control, minimise responsibility, but still get a slice of any exam fee or even license. Who knows? But this, I think, is just another farcical decision from FIFA with a matter relating to FFAR. Not just for candidate agents, but also for licensed agents, and maybe even for some of the national member associations who've now spent time getting their exam procedure right, and they're operating it pretty well now. Firstly, for the candidate agents, they now have that further delay in obtaining a license and uncertainty over what form the exam is going to take. Will it prove to be fairer, as you said, if not easier for them compared to previous candidates? Then, in terms of licensed agents who's passed the exam, will it be unfair on them if the new candidates are sitting an easier exam? And ultimately, this makes a mockery of the license and the FFAR as a whole, if it wasn't a joke already with the way it's been implemented. Totally devaluing the license and, in effect, the regulations as a whole. Almost to a point where, dare I say, we should have stuck with RWWI and the regulations on working with intermediaries, because the way it's going, it's not that far away from it. Just how much money have FIFA wasted on this? And the money of those who have legitimately challenged a few parts of the FFAR. And actually, FIFA, on reflection, probably haven't wasted that much money given the fees that they've accumulated thus far from FFAR license fees, which in turn may prove to be on a false premise and could possibly be open to a class action claim. Plus, if they now charge a fee for this remote or online exam, will this fee go direct to FIFA? And I haven't publicly said this before, but some people at FIFA presiding over this debacle should go. No ifs or buts, heads should roll as they have proved now for what is probably some 5, 6 or even 7 years that simply they aren't up to the job, they don't understand the agents industry. Some of those people say they don't listen to the agents angle anymore, but we are pretty certain they do. So, do I apologise for this? No, absolutely not. And I don't think I need to, because this has been an utter shambles for years and continues to be. That's been to the detriment of many, not just the agents. And if FIFA are going to do this properly, they need to consult with the right parties and people to make agent regulations practical, applicable, and fair. Because if they think it's enough to throw a few people from the legal fraternity at this to come up with some regulatory model who have no experience of the agents world, it isn't. And that is something many have said for years. And also, whilst I'm on it and whilst I'm full rant here, Peter, forming a working group with a mix of people who either don't represent anyone, have little or no experience of the industry, or are just FIFA cronies to falsely create a narrative of harmony and consultation doesn't wash either. And those on the AWG who do have the knowledge and experience, then it seems FIFA is obviously just paying them lip service or simply not listening to them.
Jonathan, very strong words. That's a huge critique. I mean, I've got friends at FIFA. I've got friends within the FIFA agents working group. Look, I understand your concerns. It's a very tough assessment of people, but look, it's a very difficult job. I always say the agents industry and regulating it is a very, very difficult job. People are doing the best they can at FIFA. There's people on the FAWG trying to do the best
But
they can.
Peter, the best isn't good enough then, obviously. And I know people at FIFA and I know good people at FIFA and I know good people on the AWG, but if they're doing their best ain't good enough.
It's a tough one. It's a very tough one. It's as a lot of people say, you can look from the outside and you can critique things, but it is a very hard job. But you're right, there have been a lot of chop and change, and it doesn't instill confidence in the agent industry. We don't know what happened at the last meeting of the FAWG. We as agents need the agent association who have got representatives or members to give the necessary information. There are no minutes for the recent December meeting, 2024 meeting of the FWG. They would have been quite enlightening, especially after we've been talking about circulars and changes to RSTP, etc. It would have been good to see all that, because if you look at the FIFA website on the FAWG, the FIFA Agent Working Group, it only mentions the 3 meetings so far. One in May 2023, December 2023, and June 2024. And it mentions the topics that have been discussed and the number of measures that have either been implemented or in the process of being put in place. There's been a creation of a template representation agreement. There's recommendations that member associations do not overcharge agents for exams, to reduce license fees for continuous license holders, that there's been, and we've discussed this before, memorandum of understanding between FIFA and some of the agent organisations. Now, we know this is a new initiative because it only happened I think, the second or third exam, that candidates who failed can now do an exam review process. Someone obviously suggested that. That's a good idea. The digital card, we know that's come on board, and for licensed football agents, that was one of the initiatives that's come out of the FAWG. Reduction of the exam registration period to 45 days. Is that an FAWG suggestion? Not sure, but that's been implemented. One good initiative, if that came from the FWG, is publication of the National Football Agent Regulations. I know there's about 11 listed on the FIFA website, but these seems to be some of the initiatives that come out of the FWG. But we don't know what happened in December. And that for me is concerning, because December would have been a crucial meeting from what you've discussed, Jonathan, and what we've discussed, all these recent changes this last month or so.
And Peter, I think that's a pretty good audition for your role as a lawyer in defending what is largely for me the indefensible on so many things. Digital IDs and an exam appeal process that I've had 2 people contact me in the last couple of months who've got a problem with that. But I'll take a deep breath and maybe a cup of chamomile tea to calm down a bit. But there is one thing I noticed in these revised FFAR. And this for me is a key issue that alarmed me a fair amount, Peter. And it may be something a lot of people have probably missed, which is understandable because it is something that has been removed from the original 2023 version of the FFAR. But something I've been wary of in the early drafts of FFAR and presentations by FIFA on FFAR going back several years. And this is in relation to Article 28 on enforcement, where FIFA have removed the following paragraph from the FFAR. And I quote, "For the avoidance of doubt, the obligation of clients is to only utilise football agents to perform football agent services in relation to a transaction." Now, I may be reading a bit too much into this, but for me, by removing this seemingly small and insignificant paragraph, this degrades the onus and duty of other football participants to uphold these regulations, whether they be clubs, players, managers, coaches, leagues, or even member associations. And it is the failing of some of those participant groups, not just agents, to uphold agent regulations, whether it's FFAR, RWWI, or anything that came before, because this is largely why this industry is such a wild west and such a mess in many respects. And whilst this duty is arguably reiterated to an extent elsewhere in the FFAR, removing it from this place and in this form could be telling.
Very interesting observation, John, to see this aspect of the FFAR missing, if that is indeed the case. I mean, the whole premise of the FFAR is to have licensed agents operating and dealing with football related transactions, not unlicensed agents. It is interesting as the counterfactual is, and we'll see this in the FIFA agents report, football agent report, which came out recently, we'll cover in a future episode. But also having seen some information from the FIFA Secretariat, especially on disciplinary matters, that FIFA has conducted investigations into unlicensed agent activity and have also asked for licensed agents or other stakeholders to report unlicensed agents. Is what you mentioned an omission or is it a deliberate change? Because there is reports that FIFA has taken action or asked National Association to take action on unlicensed agents or unlicensed agents activity. We may need to get more information on this, but that's a very good observation because that is an important provision. Because the whole proviso is to deal and get rid of the unlicensed and chancer agents who are operating outside the system. Get them out of football. But this change, if it is official, is worrying, Jonathan.
Yeah, and overall, sadly, I think the way this release of the revised FFAR was conducted and the way it was released just goes to show this seeming disregard that those handling agent affairs at FIFA have for agents, including poor communication, oversights in terms of implementation, projects and procedures, and just generally a lack of consideration for not just agents, but everybody who's affected by agent activity. After all, they did a similar thing last year with FFAR and circulars 1873 and 1874 that left everyone bewildered to an extent, from agents to FIFA's own member associations. And just to cement this fact of poor planning and a lack of consideration, just yesterday afternoon, Tuesday, the 14th of January, FIFA finally sent out an email informing us of the revisions to the FFAR in this draft that we're talking about. And I think this was, at best, an afterthought of an email from FIFA, probably prompted by a flood of criticism we've noted on the likes of LinkedIn since Circular 1919 and the lack of timely information from FIFA about these FFAR changes.
You're definitely right there, Jonathan. I think LinkedIn is a resource for agents, especially following circulars like 1919 or other changes or revisions to the FFAR. It's the space. A lot of commentators, a lot of football lawyers, a lot of agents association commenting, maybe criticizing or updating what is going on with these changes. And I think people read all this and then have to provide further clarity because the first attempt at providing clarity, as you mentioned, is not there. So they've always had to adapt. And good thing is, there's a lot of people on the case who raise these matters, especially on LinkedIn. Also, see on LinkedIn, and you mentioned Circular 1919, which is about the exam, that it's on the flip side as well, that all these FIFA exam training providers are all of a sudden advertising their services, as are many football lawyers in relation to preparing for the new 2025 exam. And this is, you got to register with this date and all the rest of it. So not only is FIFA, everything they publish, dissected or broken down on LinkedIn, but FIFA's also created, especially with FFAR, new regulatory agent regime, a new advisory and training industry. You mentioned earlier that FIFA may, down the track, want to send out to external providers some of the training or CPD or whatever it is. But it seems like a whole industry has been created, whether it's inadvertent or not, around the FFAR. And I think LinkedIn is the hub. A very good observation, Jonathan.
Could you imagine what's going to happen to that industry if the ECJ throw the FFAR out entirely? I don't think it will happen, but I think there's a possibility still. But just before I pass back to you, Peter, for the announcements and reminders, as well as to close the show, we also noticed something else on the agent association front in recent weeks with regards to the possibility of a new agent association or associations. And this wasn't the rumour of a new UK and Ireland Agents Association, which I don't think was really a credible proposal from what I saw anyway. This seems to be an international agents association led by a key figure formerly from one of the other international agents associations, Now, of course, we already have TFF, the Football Forum, EFA, the European Football Agents Association, and PROFA, that's if they're still going. And then we have many regional associations around the world. But I'm going to make an executive decision on this one, Peter. I hope you don't mind, that we don't mention the name of any new associations until we have more details and see more flesh on the bones from any newly proposed agent association. Not least as I think football agents have had too many false dawns and empty promises from many of those associations who are supposedly, at the end of the day, there to represent the interests of the agents as a collective.
Understand why you don't want to mention them, but I will say this. What happened to AFA, AFA, Association of Football Agents in England? Is this a replacement? Not sure. I mean, is this a new agent association?
No comment.
No comments. All right, let's move on. But that's an announcement. The second one is a global organization dedicated to representing and empowering FIFA licensed football agents worldwide. Very much a new organization. I don't know much about it. I know that it's free membership, so no cost to join, but it's solely for licensed agents. I assume both new organizations, if they take hold, will be only for licensed agents. One is, as we mentioned, more regional, but this one's a more international one, so more on the TFF PROFA model. So that's a new initiative. Now, this has been top heavy, very much on regulatory matters. And I have to put in one little announcement in terms of what we're really here about, and that's about the business of football agency. Ilhan Gundogan, whose brother is Ilkay Gundogan, has joined the Roof family, which is the big German agency. He's joined their team of agents to work on great projects and broad perspectives, as it mentioned. So, and obviously his brother will be joining, or his nephew, I should say. Sorry, it's not his brother, his nephew. Let me correct myself. Joining the Roof family as well. So that's a big move in the football business, especially in the German. Roof, we know, is very well regarded, a big agency. So just had to put in some football agent business there, Jonathan. Now, please, we're back on deck. Share the show. Please look at our LinkedIn and our Instagram and our Facebook. We've got it all there. But one thing you've been working a lot on, Jonathan, is agent-related polls on LinkedIn, and we really like the feedback or people answering those. And before I let you go, I just want to mention one of the polls that we ran. What is your opinion on fees charged by football agents? And quite interesting, we got some great feedback on that. And 60% say it's fair and justified right at this stage, with only 22% say it should be regulated, and only a small percentage of about 9 say it's high and unfair. Jonathan, you've come up with some fantastic polls, and we'll keep on doing that because we also want the pulse of what's going out there with the agent perspective. That's a buy from me.
Yeah, those polls have provided some interesting results, not least that on most of the polls we've posted, I think out of probably 30, Peter and I have agreed on 2. So that shows we don't necessarily agree on everything. But as Peter said, this has been quite a detailed episode of the Agents Angle. And as such, we hope it hasn't distracted you too much from the January transfer window. So until the next episode, which will be a special episode due to be released next Sunday on the 26th of January, so just a week away, I wish you all the best with the transfer window. Take care and bye for now.
The purpose of the Agents Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.